And for dessert, my favorite French apple tart that looks and tastes just like the real thing. One of Jeffrey's and my all-time favorite desserts is French apple tart. And the amazing thing about it is, it looks really complicated. It is so easy, you won't believe it. You really can make it at home. So I'm starting with 4 Granny Smith apples. You can really use any apples, but you want them to be very crisp and tart. I'm just going to cut them in half. And I use a melon baller to take out the center core. And then just use your knife to take out this little bit of core. All you want is just apple, just like that. And I'll show you how to cut it. So I'm just going to slice this very thinly, about 1/4 inch thick. Try and keep them as uniform as you can. Small, sharp knife. The French have an incredible tradition of making pastries. Some of them are very fancy, but some of them are simple. When I'm in Paris, I always go to the Grande Épicerie at Bon Marché. It's just fantastic. I know I always say that your friends don't have more fun if you've made dessert yourself, but every once in a while, it's really nice to do that. And it's a really easy tart, so you really can make it. Okay, that's the apples, and now I have the pastry chilling. I chilled the pastry in the refrigerator. It's really important to let it rest. I know pastry sounds daunting, but this one really is easy. I'll show you how I did it. I make it in the food processor. First, 2 cups of all-purpose flour, then 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and a tablespoon of sugar. Pulse it a few times just to combine. Next, 12 tablespoons of diced cold unsalted butter. Remember, ice cold butter is the key to really good pastry. That gets pulsed until the butter is just the size of peas. Then, with the motor running, add 1/2 cup of ice water and pulse it just until the dough comes together. Tip it onto a board. Knead it really quickly. You don't want it to warm up. Then wrap it in plastic and refrigerate it for at least an hour. I'm just going to roll it out now. A little flour. You know, the resting part's more important than you think, actually. When you roll out dough and it hasn't rested, it just springs back to where it was originally. If you let it rest and you roll it out, it has much more elasticity. So I'm going to roll this out to about 10 by 14 inches. Just roll it from the middle. It's the best way to roll pastry. The reason why it's so important for the dough to be really cold is when the heat of the oven hits the butter, it causes steam, and that's what makes light, flaky pastry. Okay, let's see if we're close. 10 by 14. So, 10 by, well, that's pretty good. Sharp knife, and just cut it to 10 by 14. I always have a ruler in my kitchen because I use it all the time for pastry. Okay, it's just going to go right onto a sheet pan, parchment paper, the easiest way to do it. Roll it up right around your rolling pin and just lay it right on the pan. I'm going to take one of the apples. I'm just going to fan these out. Just layer them one on top of the next. You can do it any way you like. You can do it sideways. I like to do it diagonally across. I just think it's prettier. I love the simplicity of this. There's no filling. It's just pastry and apples, butter and sugar. You can do it with peaches or you can do it with pears, but I have to say my favorite is apples. And if you do it with other fruit, you want them to be really firm. You don't want them too juicy, otherwise you'll end up with a mess in your oven. Okay, that's the apples. Now some sugar. 1/2 cup of sugar. I know this seems like a lot of sugar for a small tart, but what it's going to do is caramelize the apples. It's going to mix with the juices of the apples when it bakes. And it's going to be just fantastic. So believe me, you need to use the whole 1/2 cup. Okay, now some really ice cold butter. About 1/2 stick of butter, and it's chopped up in small dice. And I'm just going to distribute it, and it's going to mix with the sugar. So, cut it in quarters, and then just dice it. So just distribute it on top. It doesn't have to be perfect or exact. Just make sure it's well distributed. You're not going to believe how fabulous this is when it comes out of the oven. The whole house smells like apples and butter and sugar. Okay, into the oven, 450 degrees, which is a hot oven, 45 minutes, and it'll be golden brown and delicious. If the edges burn a little bit, don't worry, that's what it's going to do. I used to think French apple tart was completely out of my grasp until I started making one. And it's really quite simple, just step by step. I'm making a French apple tart for Jeffrey's dinner tonight. So the next thing is a classic apricot glaze for the tart. It gives it a really nice finish. So I'm going to take about a half a cup of apricot jam. If you can find apricot jelly, it's even easier, but I can never find it. I'm just going to put some in a pan. It doesn't have to be an exact amount. I'm just going to heat it up with about 2 tablespoons of Calvados. Don't go out and buy a bottle of Calvados if you don't have some. It's a nice apple flavor liqueur, just enough to thin it. I'm just going to heat this up until it's melted. I'm really looking for sort of a runny consistency. When the jam melts, it's going to be just right. I want something that's very easy to brush on the tart. Okay, this should be good. So I just have a sieve and a bowl. I'm going to pour this right into the sieve. I can really smell the warm Calvados. It smells so good. And just strain it through. And that's the glaze. I'm just going to brush this on the top of the tart when it comes out of the oven. So the apples are perfectly browned. It's a little burnt, which is wonderful. And I'm just going to glaze the top of it. I actually glaze the apples and the pastry. I can actually smell a little bit of Calvados in the glaze. Just adds that extra bit of flavor. And it actually preserves the apples. It keeps them from drying out. Now that's a major dessert in very little time, isn't it? I always serve an apple tart on a board. Makes it easy to cut while you're presenting it. Just earthy, simple, big spatula. Just loosen it from the parchment paper. Lift it up. Now, who wouldn't want to have that for dessert? I know a husband that will love it. Ready for a little French apple tart?
Well, sounds great. This is the best apple tart I've ever had.
You always say that.
No, this is really good.
When have you ever not said that?
Well, there was that one time, remember? That time that really was bad.
You're right.
You're allowed one failure in 40 years. I can live with that.